pretty certain I would have won. I'm pretty certain I would have been reelected Speaker, but I term limited myself and was planning on going back to business. And about maybe 18, 20 months ago that I decided that somebody needed to be able to run for Senate who had a credible chance at defeating Senator Hagan.
Tonight we share our conversation with Republican U.S. Senate candidate Thom Tillis. This has been a tough campaign for the candidates, and as we near Election Day, it is still an extremely close race. We have heard a lot from both Tillis and incumbent Democrat Kay Hagan on the issues. We've also been bombarded with attacks and advertising from outside interest groups. We want to clear away the noise and get to know these people that folks will be voting for on November 4th, outside of the talking points. Tonight, we head to Huntersville with Thom Tillis and his wife Susan. But first, a quick look at how we got to today.
Y'all know what I'm talking about.
Thomas R. Tillis jumped on North Carolina's political scene in 2006, beating an incumbent Republican in the primary to take a seat in the state house. 4 years later, Republicans gained control of that body, as well as the Senate.
This is a great day. We're going to change things.
Tillis took a lead role in that takeover and was rewarded, being elected Speaker of the House.
We went in there unified, we came out unified, and I have every reason to believe that that's why we're going to go into the legislative session and make history.
Republicans came into office with a to-do list, from getting a same-sex marriage ban on the ballot to overhauling the state's voting laws.
If we want to get voter ID passed, then we're going to have to be willing to compromise at some level. And I'm guardedly optimistic that before the elections occur next November, we will have a compromise bill in place.
Voter ID took a little extra time until Republicans completed their sweep, taking the helm at the governor's office. For Tillis, this passion for coming up with a plan and following through started at an early age.
So I just saw my father and my mother working hard, and that's what instilled into me.
Tillis has humble beginnings, born into a working-class family. He moved around a lot growing up, but this middle child graduated near the top of his high school class and already had several years of work experience under his belt by the time he got his diploma. Tillis' first job out of high school was as a warehouse records clerk, not graduating from college until he was 36 years old. Tillis, his wife Susan, and their children Lindsay and Ryan settled into North Carolina. Here, he won his first elected office, school PTA president. Once he made his move to Raleigh, his rise to the top was quick, and his opponents started making a lot of noise.
The most anti-worker, anti-working people administration we have seen in North Carolina in recent history.
For Tillis, he was sure he was on the right path for the state.
When you're in the minority, you're always dreaming about being in the majority, right? My guess is those in the majority never dreamed about being in the minority, so they just were not mentally prepared.
As with any leader, Tillis faced his share of scrutiny.
That is not good government. That is not the way government should function.
From holding sessions in the middle of the night to override vetoes.
It's an embarrassment. It's a difficult time.
To scandal with his chief of staff and questions about how it was handled. But most of Tillis' tenure was marked by victory after victory for his party, and as the near of the end of his self-imposed term limit, he was pleased with his accomplishments.
Never compromise your ideals. You have to stand firm to them. That's what got you elected. But I think there's a way to go about moving legislation and gaining support that can eliminate the gridlock. We've got our bling, I guess, campaign bling now.
And he says he was ready to move on to the U.S. Senate.
I think it's a credibility and trust issue.
And this man, who was on the move a lot as a young boy, says he is ready for one more big move.
U.S. Senate, Thom Tillis.
To the nation's capital. Let's start this at the beginning. You're not a North Carolina native. In fact, you've lived in quite a few locations. Tell me a little bit about your life growing up.
I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and I lived there. Every year I was in a different elementary school. We moved around a lot in Jacksonville and over in New Orleans, and then ultimately up into Tennessee. I got 5 brothers and sisters, and 3 boys, 3 girls. I got 3 older sisters, and we lived out in the rural areas of Jacksonville, north of Jacksonville, not far from the airport, and lived across from a dairy farm, and really had more of a rural life when I was growing up. And then as I got into my teens, we were more in urban types of settings like New Orleans and Nashville. And then after I graduated from high school, I moved away from the home of my family, which is over in Nashville now. My mother and everybody lives. I went to Chattanooga, and then Boston and New Hampshire and Chattanooga and Atlanta and Northern Virginia, and then I moved to North Carolina in 1998 and on beautiful Lake Norman.
You've been out in the working world then since, well, even during high school. You were out
Since
there
1972.
Talk to me about some of the highlights of your professional career.
I got recruited, and I was probably only 9 months or a year into my at Nashville State when I got recruited to a company in Chattanooga. So I went to Chattanooga and worked for an insurance company for about 2 years, a little less than 2 years, I guess. And then I was recruited by a company up in Boston, Wayne Laboratories. So I'm 23 years old at the time, I think. Yeah, I moved up to Boston. I mean, out of the deep South where I'd been all my life up into Boston, and was really trusted with great responsibilities for somebody who was 23, 24 years old with no degree. And then I worked in research and development, and then came back south and was recruited by Price Waterhouse to come in as a manager in 1990. It was another thing. I just had great leaders who believed in me and gave me responsibility that led to me being admitted to the partnership 6 years after I joined the firm. And then from there to IBM, and then to the legislature, and now here.
What kind of politician are you?
I really just transferred my professional experience into this role. I'm very process oriented. That's why we made all the rules changes in terms of trying to make the legislature more efficient. And so I'm more someone as a partner at Price Waterhouse and a partner at IBM. You're less day-to-day contributor. You're more focused on how can you make your team the most productive? How do you organize to make them most productive? How do you identify the folks that are the leaders that can bring other members along, other staff along? And I've really applied those skills directly to what we've done in the legislature.
Are there any modern day politicians that you aspire to be like?
Oh, there's a lot of good ones. Everybody have their own unique strengths and weaknesses. So I tend to be, as a consultant, you have this thing called best practices. So I look at one elected official that has great interpersonal skills, another one who has great process skills, and I try and learn from all of them. There's not any one that I want to be just like. I want to continue to be Tom Tillis. And I think that's one of the problems that some politicians have. They get into a body and they want to be just like another member, but that's not what people want. They want you to be uniquely focused on things for the people who elected you. And I think if you are, then it's not wise to be just like somebody else, like Kay Hagan being just like Harry Reid.
For over 20 years, Tillis has had his wife Susan by his side. They have 2 grown children, Lindsay and Ryan. Susan has become an integral part of this campaign, out stumping across the state. She joined us to talk about Tom.
Let's hear the story. How did you guys meet?
So we met.
She flirted with me.
We actually met up in Boston. So I had graduated college and I was working for an advertising agency at the time, and he was working in the same building for a different company. And apparently he had eaten dinner but invited me out to dinner the same night. So we went out to eat, and that's how we met. So in the same office building.
2 dinners in one night?
Oh yeah, I had eaten, and then I was back around the office, and I saw she was coming out. So I said, "Would you like to go to dinner?" She said, "Yeah." And so I ate again about an hour later, and then we spent about 3 hours at the same restaurant.
That's true.
Must have been a pretty good meal.
It was a great meal. It's when I determined I was going to marry her.
So what's he like as a dad? Who's the disciplinarian between you two?
Tom.
What kind of dad has he been for you?
Oh my gosh, he's been there through everything from coaching t-ball to, driving the kids around. And he actually traveled quite a bit, early on in our marriage and even with the kids. But he started having 2 things that he made sure that his employers knew was Monday nights he wanted to be home, and that was usually when he would be out there coaching t-ball or coaching the kids softball or soccer or helping out in the school and volunteering. So that was one of the things. But yeah, he's probably a little more strict than I am.
What did you think when he told you for the first time that he wanted to run for office? Did you see that in his future?
Actually, I did. And if we go back to our first date, there were two things that he told me on our first date.
It was the first date.
So I'm surprised I didn't run out the door at that point. But he told me two things that I needed to know about him. And one was that one day he hoped to be in public service. And the second thing was he hoped to have a son named Thomas Ryan Tillis. And so 28 years later, I'm very happy to say we have both.
I'm glad the meal went well, but the Thomas Ryan Tillis is a family tradition. We're all named Thomas R. Tillis. So anyway, and then I think the public service thing, it was amazing. I guess it was just God telling me we were going to be married. Can't say I ever had that discussion before.
A lot of times we hear that it can be harder on the loved one than the actual politician themselves. This has been a negative campaign. There's a lot of negative advertising out there. How hard has that been for you to watch?
You know what, I think because he's been in public service for quite a long time now and been the speaker, you get accustomed to it, but I also believe in our message, and I believe in the things that he's done for North Carolina. So I know his heart, I know this man, and I know what he's done for our state. So it makes it really easy for me to just put that aside and stay on message and do what I need to do.
I think it's harder on my mother. My mother is, she'll be 82 years old on October 4th, and she lives over in the Nashville area, but she's internet savvy, she's on Facebook, she streams WRAL, she streams Time Warner, she's trying to focus on the race, and she posted something really sweet a week or so ago saying, you know, I know my son, and I know those ads are just political games, but she's, you know, I think probably more than anybody, it's mom that some of this negative stuff weighs on, but even she's pretty philosophical about it. She knows her son.
How about the kids?
I think the kids are the same way. You know, Lindsay is, we'll see some of the ads and she'll call us up and say, Mom, did you see that ad? It made me laugh. And
yeah.
So she works at a nursing home, and so I think the biggest or the funnest part of her job now is actually hearing from her residents, because they've now just made the connection that she is the daughter of that man on TV. So,
what's something we don't know about him? I mean, obviously now we're starting to learn more and more about him out there. What's something we don't know about Thom Tillis?
Oh my gosh, I would guess that most people don't know how funny he is, because I think, you know, he always looks very serious as the speaker, and but I would think it's his sense of humor and just that he's just a regular old guy.
Final question. What will 6 years under Thom Tillis in the U.S. Senate look like?
A lot different from the last 6 years. You know, if you take a look at the 7.5 years, going on 8 years I've been in the legislature, I'm proud of what we've gotten done. I'm proud of where the state is now economically. We continue to be dragged down by the national economic scene, but we're making great progress. We're going to get the economy back on track. We're going to get America back to the great nation that it must be for the world. We're going to make America safer, and we're going to take care of this generation. And I might add that the generation, people that are 20 and 30, 40 years old, who are still working to try and realize their dream. This isn't just about the kids coming up. This is everyone who's trying to work hard and realize their dream. And I think 6 years from now, this won't take 10 or 20 years to fix. It just takes leadership, principled leadership, and making some courageous decisions, which means that you're going to have to part from your party. You're going to have to part from the leadership and make tough decisions. That's how, at every point in time in history where America's been down, it's been when courageous leaders went up there, didn't worry about getting reelected, they worried about getting America back to the great place it should be. And I believe over the next 6 years, that's exactly what you're going to see when I'm elected.
Kay Hagan was sworn in as North Carolina's junior senator in 2009, taking her place in Washington while carrying on her family tradition of public service.
I'm ready to go on to November. It's a wonderful feeling. I think we've run a great race, and getting into this primary has really helped me be a better campaigner. So I'm ready to take on Miss Elizabeth Dole.
Hagan took on an incumbent Republican to win her seat, and even though she was not considered to be a household name when the race began, she walked away with a win in 2008.
We need change, and whether it's a Democrat idea, a Republican idea, or an independent idea, if it's a good idea, let's get behind it.
For Hagan, politics was all around her growing up. Her uncle was a U.S. Senator and governor of Florida. Her dad, a mayor.
When you've got elected officials living with you, related to you, we were certainly attuned to what was going on at the time, what was important, and I think people really know politics are local.
K.R. Hagan was born in Shelby, North Carolina in 1953. She moved to Florida as a child, returning to her southern roots in the summers, helping her grandparents on their tobacco farm. She permanently moved back to North Carolina after attending law school at Wake Forest University, where she also met her husband, Chip. Hagan worked her way up to bank vice president before deciding to take a break from her professional career to raise her 3 children.
I decided if I ever was going to be a stay-at-home mom, I should go ahead and do that.
Her turn in public service started after she served as a county campaign manager for Jim Hunt's gubernatorial run. In 1998, Hagan was elected to the state Senate. Hagan rose to power while in the Senate, becoming a chief budget writer.
You know, when you're handling a $21 billion budget, you look at the needs and demands across North Carolina.
Hagan then made the jump to the U.S. Senate. She lists equal pay for women, working to offer one-on-one help to folks across the state, and military concerns amongst her top issues.
Passing this legislation this week, we can keep our promise to our service members and veterans who do not deserve to have their retirement benefits cut.
Hagan watched as the stage got more difficult in D.C. during her tenure. In the 2010 midterms, Democrats lost control of the House, and Republicans made big gains in the Senate. Democrats hope to make those losses back in 2012.
We've got to have great leaders, and that's what's so important for the Democrats here tonight, to realize that our policies are going to make the difference for the middle class, to grow that middle class out.
But control of the chambers remained the same. The gridlock in Washington is now ever present, lawmakers passing less legislation than they have in a generation. But for this woman who used to be an intern at the U.S. Capitol, she says she's glad to be part of it, with aspirations of making things better for North Carolinians.
You know, I was born in Shelby. My dad had grown up on a very, very small tobacco farm. And so my family, they went to, from graduating, he went to Charlotte, where my older brother was born. I was born in Shelby, then we moved to Charleston, and then we moved to Central Florida, which was my mother's home. And my father ended up building a tire store, literally with his hands and his business partner. And so when I was growing up, my dad owned a tire store. I used to work at the front desk, at the layaway desk. So when people would come in to buy tires, he would sell them to them over time, because tires for a lot of people are very expensive. And so I got my first sort of inkling in the accounting business and in the business of really being with people and treating people incredibly well. My dad is one of the nicest people I know, and I have an older brother and a younger brother. And my mom, she was a stay-at-home mom. And when my mother was 52 years old, she suffered a massive stroke, debilitating, paralyzed on half of her body. She had aphasia, which means she really couldn't speak. So we saw unbelievable trials and tribulations, and at the same time, the loving care of a very loving family.
Okay, so what is this that I've seen that you worked on a tobacco farm in the summers?
I did. As I said, my dad grew up on a very small tobacco farm, so every summer I would go up there, spend about a month with my grandparents. I'd work on the farm. And this was a long time ago, and I was actually called a hander. They would bring the tobacco in, still with mules and a sled. They would put it up there, and I would pick 3 leaves and hand it to the woman who was the stringer, who was putting that on the wooden bar. And at that time, my goal was to be a stringer, because I think she got paid 25 cents an hour more. And it was hot. It was dirty, but it was, you know, I enjoyed it because I loved being with my grandparents, loved being on the farm, and every day at lunch, my grandmother would have us all up to the house, outside on tables, where she'd cook every vegetable that I've ever heard of, and would have a great spread that she would serve to all of us.
So your uncle was Lawton Chiles.
Yes.
How much of an impact did it have on your life to watch him in his public service?
You know, when he was in the United States Senate, I always knew that there was this one great, honest man that was representing the country. And before he ran for U.S. Senate, he was in the State House, the State Senate in the state of Florida. So when he ran for for the U.S. Senate, he decided to walk the state of Florida. So many a day, we would be with Walk and Lawton on the trail someplace across Florida. My cousins, his children, many times spent many nights with us. We were all about the same age. And then on the weekends we'd go out. I called him Uncle Bud. Obviously his kids called him Dad, and we would be campaigning with my Uncle Bud. And he was the salt of the earth. He actually walked in hiking boots. He was getting these terrible blisters. And there was this debate going across the state as to what kind of shoes he should ultimately wear. And he ended up wearing these hiking boots. But one lady called in and said, you should put Vaseline on your feet to keep from getting blisters. And that's what he did, and that worked.
So was politics something that was discussed in your house a lot?
Certainly. I mean, when you've got elected officials living with you, related to you, we were certainly attuned to what was going on at the time, what was important. And I think people really know politics are local. So, you know, depending on everywhere you went, my dad would have discussions with neighbors, with people at the grocery store. You know, my dad, as I said, was in the tire business. I can remember as a young girl going around parking lots, and my dad would look at the tread on somebody's tires and put his business card on the windshield telling that person, you know, your tread is low. So we met a lot of people.
So talk to me about the beginning of your professional career, what it is that you did to get started out there in the working world.
Well, you know, I met my husband at Wake Forest Law School, and we actually got married before the end of my third year, right between the two semesters of my third year. He lived in Greensboro. He ended up working for a law firm, so I ended up deciding to go into the corporate world. And I worked for one of the big banks in North Carolina. Originally did trust and estate law, and then did primarily real estate lending. And, you know, I loved the business profession. I think you get a lot of benefit out of setting goals, hitting those goals. It really energized me. But I also was very involved in the community. I was involved in the United Way, in the Chamber of Commerce, in the Arts Council, and I thought that too was a way of giving back.
These days, if Hagan isn't in Washington or on the campaign trail, you'll probably find her playing with her grandson, Harrison. Harrison's mom, Carrie, joined us to talk about what it's been like to grow up with Hagan.
You probably don't know the difference because you grew up with it, but to have a mother who is in public service, who, you know, people are counting on her to help them out on stuff growing up. What was it like to have people just always know who your mom is?
Well, you know, it was definitely a unique experience, and I wouldn't change it for the world. And when she decided to run for the state senate, I was in about 6th grade, and I remember sitting around the dining room table in our house and having a family discussion, and all 3 kids, we were all very supportive of it. And she wanted to make sure that we understood, you know, she would have to be in Raleigh a lot, and, you know, I was the youngest, so it would, you know, theoretically kind of affect me the most. And I said, absolutely, go for it. What do you have to lose? And she was always, it was wonderful because even when she was in Raleigh and I would be playing sports and have soccer and field hockey games, and we would travel a lot for those games, and so it would work out great because she would be in Raleigh and then she'd sneak out and come to my game, my soccer game in Raleigh, or if it was in Cary or wherever it was, she would always make an effort to be there. And I just thought it was a great experience. We know it definitely is a little different being in the public eye, but we kind of knew that going in, and it's been so far so good.
You said you talked about politics in your house a lot. Did you with your children also?
Always. You know, I can remember doing a lot of carpool. I had the van, we were carpooling, and tell them the story. Do you remember the story about the phone call, the governor's?
Oh, well, she would be on the phone, and she'd be on the phone, and I'd be asking her, and I was like, who are you on the phone with? She goes, the governor. I'd say, which one? You know, it's just funny things like that. And yeah, the carpool was the funny thing because I had a group of really core girlfriends. There were 5 of us that we had carpool, and when she went to Raleigh, she used to be on Tuesdays, and that didn't work out very well with the Raleigh Senate schedule. So we switched her day to Friday so that she'd be home from session, and she would be sure to be able to drive carpool every Friday and, you know, catch up with what's going on with all the girls. And
You learn a lot driving a carpool. A lot.
That's probably true, but she would also throw things back out at us, and whatever was going on in Raleigh, I think I just remember one time there was like a bicycle helmet law or something, and she's running it through carpool. She's like, all right, what do y'all think about this? You know, talking about bicycle helmets. And we were like, well, yeah, definitely. That makes sense. She's like, okay, great.
I can remember one time too, Carrie was a page when I was in the State Senate, and that's when we passed the driving law where students could no longer, while they were provisional licensed, use a cell phone, I think even cut the radio on, things like that. And,
yeah, driving after 9 p.m. and the 1 passenger rule.
Yeah, they were very concerned about that.
Yes, my friend and I that were Senate pages at the time, we were trying to convince her otherwise, but you know, she was all about safety.
I held my own.
So what's it like to turn the TV on, see your mom talking on the Senate floor, or shaking hands and talking with the President of the United States? What's that like?
You know, it's kind of surreal. Sometimes it takes me by surprise, and you know, sometimes you're going about your day on a normal basis, and then you see something going on, or she's got something on her schedule that's just amazing, like who has that experience? And you just kind of have to pinch yourself, be like, wow, that's cool. You know, that's my mom. So we're very proud, and it's a very surreal experience sometimes.
You talked that you wanted to make sure that young girls know that they can be whatever they want to be. Obviously, that's something you passed along to your daughters as well.
I certainly hope so. And my son. And my son. I can remember one time, Carrie got married in October on a Saturday, and I actually had to meet the president in Asheville on Monday. And I can remember the president when he greeted us, and he actually said to the crowd, well, Kay Hagan's daughter just got married on Saturday. And I just remember thinking, I wonder if Carrie is hearing this.
I was on my honeymoon, but then somebody had emailed me and was like, hey, nice shout out from the president. And I was like, what are you talking about? And had to go YouTube his speech from Charlotte or Asheville or wherever he was that day. And here we are, Will and I are on our honeymoon, and I was like, oh my God, the president just talked about me.
That's got to be a pretty neat experience.
It was pretty cool.
So you became a grandmom recently. What is that like?
The best joy in life. Unbelievable. I was actually able to get back to Greensboro after she'd gotten to the hospital, but before she had the baby. And, you know, just to be in the hospital, and then they come out and say everybody's healthy. It was fabulous, just fabulous. And to see this little baby. I actually, as every grandmother will say, he's the cutest, smartest, sweetest thing that's ever hit the earth. And it's true.
And you've got number 2 coming.
Number 2, we're going to have, my older daughter is due in mid-December. And she doesn't want to know what she's having, so we're going to all be surprised.
I guess just finally, before I let you go today, we've seen you in office for 6 years now. What would the next 6 years under Kay Hagan be like?
You know, as I said, I'm the most moderate. I want to get things done. I want to continue working on jobs and the economic recovery. And in North Carolina, that's incredibly important because we have so many people that are still unemployed and underemployed. So I want to get those people back to work. I think we need to increase the minimum wage. I think that would help, well, I know it would help 1 million people in North Carolina. And I also want to be sure that women get equal pay for equal work.